If you're the kind of person who's spent a weekend tinkering with a cheap synth and then got a little scared when the sound you wanted slipped away because the instrument just couldn't handle the chord you were after, you know the frustration. I've been there trying to layer a fat bass line while the synth's voice count caps out at 8, then realizing the missing voices are the ones you need for that soaring pad. So before you drop cash on a new synth, let's figure out whether this Behringer UBXA actually solves those problems or just adds another gadget to the rack. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. First off, let's talk about what the UBXA promises: 16 voices, bitimbral capability, and a total of 32 oscillators. On paper that sounds massive, especially for the price point that Behringer usually hits. In real-world terms, that means you can actually play a full 8-note chord on each timbre and still have room for a lead synth on top, all without the unit choking. If you've ever tried to route a deep bass and a bright lead simultaneously on a lower-end synth, you'll know how often the sound collapses into a thin, mushy mess. The UX's extra voice count makes those layered parts stay full, which is a genuine usability win for anyone building live sets or complex studio arrangements. Now, who's going to feel the most benefit? If you're a producer who works mainly in the digital domain and only needs 1 or 2 synth voices for a track, you'll probably be fine with a smaller, cheaper unit. The UBXA starts to show its value when you're on stage or in a live looping scenario where you need to trigger multiple parts at once. Think of a solo artist who uses a synth to cover both the pad backdrop and a melodic solo. Being able to split the keyboard into 2 zones, each with its own sound, means you can keep your hands free for effects pedals and a microphone. Same thing for a DJ who wants to blast a gritty analog bass while simultaneously running a bright arpeggio. The 16-voice polyphony ensures neither part drops out. On the flip side, there are some practical trade-offs that show up when you start plugging the UBXA into a typical home studio. First, the unit is analog style but still uses a fairly conventional layout of knobs and switches. That's great for tactile control, but it also means you don't get the kind of deep preset browsing you'd find on a digital synth. If you rely on being able to quickly scroll through dozens of factory sounds, you'll need to spend time dialing in patches manually. For a lot of bedroom producers, that's not a deal breaker, but it does add a step to the workflow. Another point to consider is the MIDI implementation. The UBXA has a 16-channel 5-pin DIN MIDI In/out/through, which means you can feed it multiple MIDI tracks from a DAW or a sequencer. In practice, I've seen users set it up so that track 1 drives the first timbre, while track 2 drives the second, giving them a dual-layered sound without ever touching a foot switch. The 3/4-inch CH foot switch jacks, however, are limited to basic on-off functions. There's no built-in expression pedal, and the switches aren't velocity sensitive. If you're hoping to use a sustain pedal or assign a modulation wheel to a foot pedal, you'll need a separate pedal or a MIDI CC converter. That adds cost and complexity, which is worth mentioning because the extra gear can eat into the budget advantage the UBXA initially presents. From a sonic perspective, the analog circuitry delivers that warm, slightly gritty tone that many synth fans crave. The 32 oscillators are split across the 16 voices, so each voice effectively has a pair of oscillators to thicken the sound. In a practical test, layering a simple square wave with a sawtooth on the same voice yields a noticeably richer tone than a single oscillator would. When you push the filter resonance, the UBXA behaves like a classic analog synth, giving you that subtle self-oscillation that's perfect for creating lead lines that cut through a mix. For genre-specific users, think techno, synthwave, or any style that benefits from deep, evolving pads. The extra oscillators can be stacked to create complex timbres without resorting to external processing. But the UBXA isn't a miracle machine. There's a modest amount of noise when you crank the gain, which is typical for analog synths in this price range. It doesn't ruin the sound, but if you're recording clean, you'll want to add a little noise gate or push the output a notch lower. Also, the envelope generator is fairly straightforward: attack, decay, sustain, release knobs that affect all voices uniformly. If you need per-voice envelope shaping for intricate texture work, you'll find the UBXA a bit limiting. That's a hidden trade-off that shows up only after you've spent a few hours tweaking patches. Let's talk about integration into a setup. The 5-pin DIN MIDI ports make it easy to hook.